This is the third Beta Inclusive and Equitable Leadership Circle teaching topic. Thanks. Down here. So we are on the third of 6 in terms of a beta program. I am sure we'll continue this. Just because some folks are new, I'm going to continue to kind of repeat the circle way agreements that we hold everything in confidentiality. We listen to each other. You guys have already modeled that. You're amazing at it. We ask for what we need. We offer what we can. We help to watch the guardian group, the energy of the group. So we're here for the group, not individual needs. And I often add in the gift of non-closure because we don't meet long enough and there's so much connecting we would like to do. I often leave these feeling like it's, I want it to end. I want their closure, but there's not closure to this work. So having grace to embrace non-closure, that this is a journey. The circle-wide principles, again, leadership rotates, and we'll get more into that rotation as this group matures. Right now, this is all I've been able to manage and pilot. So again, you can start signing up for stuff more and more as this unfolds. We're all responsible for the quality of the experience. And again, we're working to be a whole organism here in our own wholeness, rather than one personal agenda. These are circle-wide practices: speaking with intention, noticing what is relevant to the conversation in the moment, listening, tending to the well-being of our collectiveness. And if you want, you can start saying like ashe, ashe, or namaste, or aho when you're done speaking, as a way to say, I am complete. That's how we're spending our time. I don't go into that. I wanted to lay it out for you where we're going through and I still may change this, but today I'm going to do a little teaching on how oppression works and how it relates to identities and narratives, because I think it's really important for where we are as we hear all these stories and how they're used. In April 20, all of these teachings, everything I'm giving you and the rest of this has more, and has much, much more, and I'd lay it out in more depth as we continue this group. So another topic in April I'll touch on is, how do you actually what does it mean to create an equity container for your organization or your team, and create a learning agenda. In May, I'll look at qualities of an equitable and inclusive leaders, and we can have some discussions about where we are with that. And then in the end, I'm going to leave you with equity principles that are out there that I've compiled from some very reputable sites that focus on equity, and how you might create your own equity story. One of the reasons I liked you to keep a learning journal and all of the things that you've learned, I have found it very helpful, is that we all need to be able to tell our stories, especially the more privileged you are, the more stories you need to tell about your own inclusive and equitable journey, because then it helps normalize that this is not such a fearful thing to talk about, and what's talked about gets acted upon. So being able to tell your own personal stories and what you've learned and grown and evolved through is really, really key. Stories move. And on the last session, I'll have an evaluation on the format and this beta program, and get your feedback on how we might continue it and the value of it, so it keeps evolving with the folks that are invested in it. So that's just a little forecast for the future. So today I want to talk about how oppression works. And while it might be really obvious, as a technician, it's helpful to sort of break it apart so we understand where we're working and what we actually need to do to stop it. So I apologize, or I'll ask for forgiveness that many of you know this, but I wanted to put it in a format that we can put our energy around where we are and what we need, and give ourselves permission to really understand how all oppression works. And it is our path towards holism. Everything we're doing in our own collective evolution right now is a path towards holism. We are already whole, but we are not living as if we're whole individuals, not broken, but whole and complete, and whole communities and whole everything, but we're not living it. But we're being pressured into seeing where we're not whole, so that we can heal that and transform it and fix it. And that if we were living through the laws of holism, we would be experiencing belonging and liberty and justice and not the pain and suffering that we are today. So part of why I do this is actually an excellent place to find biases and find stereotypes in ourselves, as well as what's coming at us externally. So all oppression actually takes over our mind, our body. So read that as your physical body, your nervous system, and your spirit. I'm going to talk today about one piece of how it takes over our mind because it's so prevalent right now in our culture. But know that I have a series of lessons and learnings on all three of these boxes. So the context I'm going to use today is colonialism, which has race, racism, and genocide involved in it. But you could insert here any ism, sexism, any ism here. Oppression works this way. All oppression works the way I'm about to explain, even though the context I'm looking specifically as oppression that's tied to race, racism, and genocide. I need to move our beautiful faces here. So the dominant class, or the dominant fill in the blank, is oppressing a subgroup, right? And in order to do that oppressing, they have to take over the mind, take over the body, and take over the spirit. And again, I'm focusing on how the dominant group actually takes over the mind. And what they do is they construct categories. So in race, they constructed the category of white and black and Native American and etc. You know the race categories. They constructed this concept of race that we all know is not real. And then they go forth and they do things to miseducate the masses about these categories. And they control the narrative and the story around these classifications, if you will. And what their goal is to make the masses think that these categories are normal. Okay? I'll briefly touch on the body and the spirit, but once they've got that narrative or those stories out there, then they also can enact things through their power and access to resources to control people's physical lives. They can even enact violence. And so if you follow the arc of what happened to African Americans that were brought over here and their relationship with police and law enforcement and lynchings over time, and then into the drug and police pipeline, that's versions of enacting violence to control physical bodies, or the threat of violence, and controlling the resource necessary for health and well-being. So that can be access to loans for housing, for health care, for education, you know, all those circles of life that make health and well-being. And what we have now online with the internet and the way we can communicate is we really do have a global psyche and a trigger economy that is designed to hijack our nervous system and help us learn how to actually be more separated and hate each other more, and how to not be enough through capitalism and what we purchase and buy. And it really does hijack your own nervous system, and you have to be very persistent to not have that hijack you. And then the spirit, and this would, you destroy as fully as possible all memories, all connections, all history, and all sense of hope. You break the subclass's spirits. And I don't need to explain a lot, you know, the genocide with Native Americans, the schools and the missions that we put them in, all of the disassociation. You can't speak your language, you can't have your heritage, you can't have your music, you can't even learn to read or write. We just numb. The dominant group numbs they paralyze the subordinate group, but they also sort of numb the masses to, again, thinking and believing that this is just the way it is. There's nothing you can do about it. This is really just the way it is. And we get here, and when we're in the spirit, this is not a religious definition of spirit. This is a spirit of your soul, of a being human. And if we can take away all your identity and your connection and your language, and then we can force you to basically become us, if you will, whatever the dominant group is, whether that's through assimilation or however we want to make you do that, then you'll be accepted. And we all know that that doesn't really happen. So this is the three triangle here of what happens when a dominant group creates this to actually oppress. So the racial oppression has three parts. Sort of race tells the story of who's black, who's white, what is the story in the narrative. And I'm going to give you some examples for the Asians, for every sort of race that we've created as a classification. These stories serve the actual system. And so race here, the lesson here is that we're not talking about culture and we're not talking about ethnicity. And the US has its own history with this. We are actually talking about a created use for the word race. And it is separate than a true cultural or ethnicity identity and experience. It's the function of race to tell a story that is serving an oppressive system. Racism is then the system collectively directed at the target subgroups. So that's the systemic racism that you're used to hearing. And then to control the narrative for the masses, whiteness, centering whiteness, is actually the system, the systems, if you will, that are directed at the beneficiaries to help them accept that this is just the way it is and there's nothing they can do, and actually hold up the racism and the race in the systems. So again, this is just providing you sort of a technician's view of how oppression works. So the dominant group, in this case, in America's own history, it was white males who owned property, white males who had resources, created and used its institutional power to deny resources to a subordinate group, and its societal and cultural powers to extract labor, extract ideas, extract creations, extract from the subordinate group to benefit the dominant groups. So it brings race and racism to this resource level where it's all about, oppression is about a resource issue, to deny resources to the subordinate group and to extract from them to serve a small number of people. All forms of oppression, so you can replace racism with other forms of oppression, operate this way. What is really an aha to most people is the dominance is by power. It's not by population. So it's a few people with a power that can dominate and subjugate a large number of people. Sometimes our minds go to that, no, it's if there's more, the majority are being this way, they cannot be oppressed, but that's not true. It's by power with the resources. And again, resources are at the heart of this. So racism is not a moral issue. It's not prejudice. It's not good or bad. It's simply this domination of resources. And that the model that most organizations use in this field is that oppression is this formula of prejudice and power. It's just people with power have a prejudice. And that's a problematic approach, because then where we've been focusing is heavily on, if we just get rid of the prejudice, then we won't have oppression. But we're missing the entire focus then on power. So it makes this a very problematic approach versus focusing on the institutional and societal denial and extraction of resources to actually stop the oppression. So focusing in then on this piece of oppression, that's just the narrative, it's just the story that is used for both the beneficiaries, i.e. the privileged groups, and the oppressed groups. They evolve with time. And I just gave you an example how they evolved with time using African Americans. But they always, always, always are serving and benefiting someone. So I'm going to give you something to think about here. So when you hear a narrative in the news, like now around immigration, the breath to take is to stop and ask, this is a narrative, and who is it's benefiting someone, and who is it benefiting? And how is it designed to make me believe that this is normal, that this is okay, that I am powerless if I am on the beneficiary side, that this is just the way it is, because that's the purpose of the narrative. It's up to you to discern who benefits and who is harmed, because any narrative that is not in service of holism, any narrative, any story that is not including everyone, especially centering those that are most affected. So any narrative on immigration, if it's not including the perspective of those who are actually coming across the border, it cannot be in service of holism. So it's got to be spun to serve somebody. And so what we're doing now is we're working consciously to figure out where we land, bringing our unconscious connection to these narratives to our consciousness so we can actually change them and certainly have more conversations about the ones that are there. So again, these narratives are designed to miseducate the masses, control the narrative around resources, and make it all normal so everything stays in place. This, of course, relates to, that's how we get marginalized identity. And this is a view that some of you have seen of the classic intersectionality matrix of power and powerlessness, where power/resources are in the middle. And as you go out from the circle, these are different ways, again, that resources and power are denied based on these identities: body size, housing. That's what oppression does. Most of you are familiar with that. So what I want to give you now is there's basically 7 primary race narratives that over time are out there serving the system. Are these completely accurate? No, they don't need to be to understand what I'm trying to convey here. And there are other nuances to each of these narratives, because no individual, no matter what your identity is a monoculture in any shape or form. But this is just simply to convey the point. So I'm going to not read you all of these, but I'm going to read a few of them so you get the idea of it and you'll have the slideshow to be able to sort of feel these narratives in your body. So I want you, as I read them, you can even close your eyes, feel where you are in them, because all of these narratives are in all of us from our socialization and our conditioning, because we all were born in a time of toxic patriarchy, capitalism, and colonialism. That was what was the field, the energy field that was out there. And they work us physically, our body and our spirit, as well as our minds. So the white racial narrative is that white people, and this is not saying that this is true. This has nothing to do with truth. These narratives are serving the dominant power structure in place. But folks want you to believe, those that have that power want you to believe these are true. So don't take this as you believe this, but you might be curious where you have been told this, and you might actually believe it and not be aware of it. So white racial narrative is that white people are the honest race. They're hardworking, they're rugged, they're on time. Time is more important than actual connection and relationships. Productivity, time is money. Productivity, it's transactional. White people are rational. They're Christian. They're good leaders. They're well-educated. They're civilized. They found this country. They're giving. They're charitable. They're competitive. They are the real Americans. They're very linear in their thinking, and they own things. They are in charge. They are the doers. I'm sure many of you in the room can relate to that. So if I take a breath, I'll read you the Black racial narrative. Again, this is what the messages out there that we're taught, that Black people are angry, they're criminals, they're drugs, and they're in gangs, they're aggressive, they're dangerous, they're really good athletes, they're uneducated, they're lazy, they don't want to work, they want to live off the system and welfare. They're really loud, they're entertaining, they're savages, they're super predators, they're abusive, they're all broken, they come from broken families, they're the underserved, they're the at-risk, they complain too much about the past. And you can follow the narrative of the white power systems that fought, the narrative would change over whether Blacks should assimilate or integrate or be segregated from the whites, both of which are oppressive systems because they're not looking at the individual. So if we go to the Native American narrative, they're alcoholics, they own casinos, they're stuck in rundown reservations, they're closer to nature, They're noble savages. We see them in their caricatures and mascots. Again, the movies, advertising, all these places that we get this feedback. They have broken English, they're uneducated, they're impossible to educate, they're simple, they're violent, they get stereotyped with dances of the wolves, they're unable to cope. Sorry, I have to move our faces with the American society as some examples of the narrative you're fed. Then we can go to Latinx narratives. They're illegal, they're dangerous to the US. We get a lot of that. They're criminals. We're hearing a lot of that right now. They have big families, they're in drugs and gangs, they're criminals, they're taking our jobs, they're uneducated, they work as menial labor, they're rapists, they don't know English, they're not from here, they're invaders, they're disease carriers, they're threats to our families, their safety, they eat beans and rice, they take resources from hardworking Americans. It's hard for me to read these because I so don't believe any of them. And my nervous system physically goes to yucky places because it violates every part of my cells. And if it's doing that to me, just reading this to you consciously, I know it's doing that to you. And I know it does that. It hijacks the average American public person who doesn't even know this is coming at them. So then there's the Arab descent and the Southwest Asian narratives. Again, we got this from 9/11 a lot, but before it was there that they're terrorists, they're violent, they're extremists, they hate American, they hate our way of life, they hate freedom, they're evil, they're agents of Satan, they're abusive to women, they're backwards, they're secretive, they're exotic, they're savages, they're brutal, they do not value the human life, they can't possibly be real Americans, etc. And then you have most Americans can't begin to distinguish the nuances in the Latin X, never mind the Asian population that's really rich and deep and vast. But there's the Asian American and the Pacific Islander narrative, and there's a kind of a pre and post. The pre was the model minority. The Asians were thought to be smart, the model minority, that before they were the model minority, excuse me. They were dangerous and shifty and lurking. The Yellow Menace, if you follow it through the gold rush era, and especially in the West, they were a threat to our economy. The men are effeminate. They're oversexed women. They're exotic. They're Oriental. They're spies. Putting them in boxes like they're just martial arts, and they've been a military threat. But at time, again, these evolve with time. They became the model minority. They're the smart ones. They're the ones that are good at math and science. They're quiet. They're submissive. They follow the rules, unlike other races, for example. They don't make waves. They're very tight families. They're hard on their families. They don't experience racism because they're doing so well to be like us. They have fully assimilated into the American dream. And then there's the racial anti-Semitism narrative. This is really rich and deep and alive right now, and I would not do justice by even trying to go there now. So I just wanted to bring it up because it's very nuanced. There's a lot of similarities with racial oppression for anti-Semitism, and then there's a lot of other layers to it that is really rich and deep right now. But the racial anti-Semitism there is that Jewish people were conspirators, they're manipulators, they're thieves, because their identity and their Jewish people have been used. They've been oppressed like other racial groups, but they've also been used and weaponized by the dominant group that complicates it. They've been dominated and weaponized by the oppressor. We could have a whole series on just that. So I read all of those to you. I'm assuming some of those rang true for you. But these are just narratives and stories, again, that hijack our mind. But as I shared with you, they're also hijacking our body and our spirit. So to leave you with a reflection here, this is a time now for you to just think about what I just presented. I'm going to stop the recording. I can find a way to do that. Or I'll add the questions here. This is where you get a few minutes to just reflect, and then we'll open it up for any group sharing. You don't have to answer any of these questions. You certainly don't have to answer all of them. They're just to trigger your learning journal here. Did anything come up for you when I brought up the limitations of the classic formula that systematic racism and oppression is the formula of prejudice and power? Were there any narratives that you can identify for race, racism in your life that you've heard, that you perhaps believe, that you got from your family or peers or you hear in the media? What narratives can you identify with for another marginalized identity? And I've listed those marginalized identities there, because you could riff out the narrative for neurodiversity people. You could riff out the narrative on mental health, people with mental illness versus a physical illness. You can riff out the narratives that we get fed about body size, about gender, etc. There's narratives we are fed that it has nothing to do with who people really are. But again, these narratives serve the system. Whether that system is capitalism or colonialism, it's serving this sort of pushing down of denying resources or extracting from people, at least in racial oppression. And then the fourth question is, can you see any biases or stereotypes or manipulation in any of these examples of narratives? I'll leave this up so you can see the screen, and for about 5 minutes, you can just journal and reflect in your own space.